Hello, everybody. Welcome to a discussion about AI and critical thinking and creativity. And who better to discuss these things with me than a critical dragon himself, Dr. AP Canavan. Hello, AP. How are you, my friend?
As ever, Nemesis, no matter how many times we've ever recorded, and you know for a fact that when you press record, a spoken warning comes up on my screen, a little thing I have to click. And I always say, can you just wait 2 seconds and I will clear this off my screen? But you always start talking while I'm still trying to click the
I
thing off the screen.
I've got to keep you on your toes. That's my job.
You're
So.
an evil man.
So, um, and people are probably going to, because if you're not familiar with AP, we've collaborated a lot in the past, and he's been less present on YouTube of late, and for good reasons. You've been gainfully employed and busy, and doing some important teaching and just life, So. But AP's here, he's around, and it's just so great to see you again, my friend, or
Well,
nemesis. Yeah.
it's very good to be here. One of the things, yes, I was gainfully employed, but I had a series of illnesses that followed on one from the other, and then was in a fairly serious car
Car
accident.
accident. Yeah.
Which, if you notice, like during this, I might be rubbing up my neck, my shoulder, and stuff. That's because of the car accident, but don't let it bother you. I'm normal. Well, I have nearly normal faculties.
They said you had a normal brain, even.
Well, MRIs went, yeah, it look, you have one. Um, which comes as a shock.
So, anyway, we're here to talk about AI, and we're approaching this, I think, from two perspectives. One is that we're both educators, we're both academics, we're both college professors. And we teach writing and literature. And so we're coming at from that direction, but we're also both involved in creative realms. And that I have published a few books, and AP is a developmental editor for a lot of writers in the fantasy genre. And we're both huge fans of literature, period, but especially fantasy, of course. And so we're coming at this with that perspective as well. So we have two hats, I guess, in a way that we're wearing here during this conversation. But I'm going to just say a bit and then I'm going to hand it over to you. But we're very concerned about what is happening with AI and its impact in both the academic realm and in the creative realms. And just this morning, actually, as of today, the day we're recording this, I read yet another study. This one's coming out of MIT that conclusively shows that the more you lean on AI tools, the less you are able to think critically. It's not the first study that shows this, but it's the latest. And this particular study, the authors actually it's been submitted for peer review, but it's not done with the peer review process. But they felt it was so urgent to get this message out that they decided to publish their findings with the proviso that it is still under peer review. But it's not the first study to show that there's this link between the decrease in the ability to think critically and the use of AI, and that is concerning for us as our wheelhouse as educators in the humanities is critical thinking. Furthermore, there are other studies that show that while use of AI tools can increase productivity, it also simultaneously decreases the sense of fulfillment in one's work, which I think tells you something. Like even if you're able to churn out more, you feel less connected to your work. You feel less investment. You feel less satisfaction because you're not really as involved in the creative process. And I would submit that human beings need to be creative. That's a fundamental part of who we are. It's an essential aspect of our humanity, our creativity. And I feel that we are putting that into jeopardy by the use of or the overuse of AI in realms where it doesn't belong. Now, I'm not completely opposed to AI. I realize there are areas where it's really helpful and can lead to important breakthroughs and so on and so forth. But I'm saying that in the creative realms, if we replace human endeavor with AI, then we are putting ourselves in serious trouble. That's my contention. So AP, I said a lot. What would you like to respond with?
Well, it's hardly a response given that you and I are pretty much on the same page about a lot of this.
Right.
But I would add, first of all, when we were talking about AI, we're generally talking about generative AI and it's usually the LLM, the large language model generative AI, to do writing tasks, to do editing tasks, to do summary tasks,
Mhm.
note taking,
So Chat
the
GPT and so
chat
on.
GPT kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about all AI. That, AI as a term covers a huge range of different applications and different programs and different uses. But when we're talking about it, the large language model generative AI, like ChatGPT, there are major issues with it. And I would argue that a lot of these companies have overpromised and grossly underdelivered is one thing. The next thing is that cognitive offloading uh, has been, and this is part of what a lot of the new research, and in fact, it's been research that's been coming out for the last couple of years, but it shows that cognitive offloading, this use of AI to do the thinking for you, is reducing our ability and capability to critically think, as you pointed out. So I think we need to be clear what we mean by critically think, and we can talk about a couple of examples of how this works. The next thing is people using it to be authors. And I have major issues with this. But again, it's not just the ethical or even environmental aspects of large language models and generative AI. I'm not even getting into those things, but actually in what people are doing and saying that they are writers. And then we get to students and how students are using it and the pressure that a lot of administration in higher education is putting on instructors to say you must integrate this because it's the tool of the future. And again, there are a number of counter arguments and a number of points that people need to be aware of in that. And I think the simplest explanation for this, the a good illustration of what this danger is, there are two things. One, we're going to talk about cognitive offloading and this harm to critical thinking. But the other, I want to show why it's overpromised and underdelivered. So if we talk about cognitive offloading for a second, people often defend generative AI in terms of, but it's just like a calculator. There were all of this, oh, the sky is falling, chicken little attitudes about when calculators came in. And one of the things is, if you're looking at a mathematics problem, you have to sit and you look at all of the terms, you look at how it's been laid out, you look at all of this information, and you put it into mathematical formula. You can then enter that mathematical formula into a calculator, and it does the calculation. You have to understand all the fundamental and basic principles of mathematics in order to create the formula. You have to be able to read through the question, understand what the question is asking, understand how to put these variables into that formula. This is all thought that the person is doing. The calculator then will calculate the result of the formula. But what you don't do is just point the calculator at a written question and it gives you an answer. The that is the one of the major differences between what we're talking about in terms of generative AI, these large language models for writing tasks, and a calculator. Because when we ask a student, read this thing, here is a set of detailed criteria that you need to bear in mind. Now, show your knowledge and understanding of the text. Write it up in a way which demonstrates you know the text, you understand how to communicate that effectively, organize your information effectively, and communicate it effectively to someone else.
Yeah.
And if we were making the calculator analogy, what would happen is the student would read the text, they would do all of this thing, they would write out all of their sort of structured argument, they would rearrange things, they'd pick out the quotations, and then they would give that to an AI, and the AI would polish it and go, here's the answer. That's not what's happening
No.
because students are taking they're saying, I've been asked this question, write an essay and put in, they sometimes have quite detailed prompts, but they fill in the question and it generates the entire question. And so what we are faced with is students who are not reading the material, so they don't know what's in it in the first place.
Right.
They are not even analyzing the question that they're being asked. They're just copying the question into a program. The program is creating an answer. They then copy that answer, put it on the page, submit it as their own work, which is academically dishonest because they didn't create it.
Right.
And then they expect a grade for it. Now, to illustrate this, there was a video that kind of went a little bit viral. And it was a professor who had said, I need you to read through this 100-page document, create a summary, the major key points that this document covers, because that's what we're going to do in the course. And this girl, about 2 minutes in, goes, well, I'm done. And you go, you cannot be done. It's a 100-page document. You must have read this. She goes, no, I'm done. Here's the summary. And goes, no, but you didn't create that. And what she had done was she took the document, gave it to an AI, and said, generate a summary.
Right.
Now, one of the things that all of the companies that make these types of products do is they say you must have a human input. You must have a human check-in because they know that generative AI creates what they have termed hallucinations. It makes stuff up. It makes stuff up very, very confidently.
Right. Right.
Now, I think it's disingenuous to call these hallucinations. We should call it exactly what it is, which is, and there's a term we have in English for this, for being exceptionally confident about something that is untrue or made up. And it's called bullshitting. And generative AI,
I was thinking.
the way that it has been created, that's what it is. That's what it does. It says it very, very confidently,
Right.
even if it is wildly wrong. And so these companies, in order to cover themselves, say, but if you generate an answer or if you generate any piece of work, you now need to go through and check that what it has generated is right. So if you're trying to create a summary report, so someone's given you a long report and you want to create the summary key points. So you feed it into an AI and tell it to do that. We know there is a risk that it will make stuff up, stuff that is untrue. It will change the meaning of things. It will missummarize things. It will make up statistics. It can do all of those sorts of things. We know that that is a possibility with what it is doing. Therefore, these companies, in order to cover themselves, say you must now go through what it has generated to see if it's accurate. But the only way that you can do that is if you have read the original source text that you're working from.
Mm.
And then you go through what it has created, the AI has created, to double check. So it's not saving you time in reading the source text because you still have to do that. And then when you have to read it and understand it. And if it's a long, complicated document, you're going to have to make notes because unless you have an eidetic memory or unless you're some sort of brilliant person who can just read a 100-page technical document and just know instinctively what everything is. We annotate these things because we need to know that information. And then when we ask something to generate a summary, you go, right, okay, let it generate the summary. And then you can go through line by line and check the summary. But in which case, you've had to read it, you've had to write up notes, you now know all of the material. So what amount of time is it saving you? Oh, well, it generated the summary. You go, but now you have to go through and check the summary.
Right.
So the time it's saving you is the difference between you writing your own summary and going through and editing someone else's summary of the same material. That's the only time you save because you
There's
still
another
have to.
difference too that's very important. And this goes back to the MIT study that I mentioned. What they found in that study is that the students who use ChatGPT specifically, generative AI, had much less recall than the students who were asked to write on their own. In other words, and they, by the way, they were even during the writing process measuring the activity in their brains. And obviously, the ones using the AI had almost nothing going on here. Whereas the ones who were actually doing their own writing had plenty of things going on. And when asked to revisit their own essays and rewrite them, the Chat GPT ones were didn't even know what was there, essentially. I mean, there was nothing there. There was no recall, which suggests to me that if you're using ChatGPT to do your work for you, to summarize, and then you go back and just kind of check it, you're not imbibing that information as deeply as someone who actually reads the thing to begin with and does the summary manually. So you're not learning, in other words, when you're leaning on AI, you're not learning, right?
And what is actually very, very concerning is you need to double check every single fact because it could be wrong. Now, it could be a very minor thing that it gets wrong. It has changed around people's names. It has attributed one thing to one person in the report when it was actually to someone else. And you go, that might be a very minor thing, that could minor error. Or it could misstate the interpretation of very serious data. It could have devastating consequences because it makes no distinction between important information and unimportant information in where it creates errors.
Right. And we see students all the time who use the AI now on Google. They'll Google something and then they'll report it as fact. And it's wrong. It's dead wrong. We've seen it again and again and again in our classrooms where people are just doing the easiest, laziest thing. And the AI tools that are most readily available are either completely making stuff up or they're getting a lot of critical facts wrong.
And like this is very serious. Like we're talking about in academia with students, which we have. There are rules, there are regulations. It obviously can impact a student's academic career and their future career, but there's wiggle room. There's wiggle room, and it's built into academic institutions for students to make mistakes so they can learn from their mistakes. That's that's what part of what university and college is. That's part of the experience. Making the mistake, finding out the repercussions of it, but it's never so severe that you cannot recover. That you learn from your mistakes so you don't make them in a more ruthless environment, which let's face it, the outside working world is a more ruthless environment than the academic environment as an undergrad.
Yeah.
That making a mistake here is recoverable. And we don't want to make them in the real world where, we could end up getting fired or criminal prosecution,
Causing harm. Yeah.
losing our license. This is a major problem within the legal sphere that a number of lawyers have been either fired, heavily fined, some are in danger of losing their legal license because they use generative AI to create legal documents that were submitted to a court.
And they were wrong.
And it made up precedents, it made up quotations, it made up court cases, it misattributed things. And these were things that were submitted to a court. There is a duty of care and a legal standard that has to be maintained. And the AI doesn't care about it, doesn't know about it. And even when you give very detailed prompts to an AI, it can still make these errors.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. So they have been overpromised and underdelivered, that you don't know when they are lying.
Right.
And if you cannot trust its output, if you are required to go through it word by word, line by line, sentence and paragraph, and every quotation, and every citation, and every reference, if you cannot trust the output,
Why bother?
then why are we using it? Oh, well, it saves time. It saves time to create potentially a catastrophically bad product.
Right. Is that what you want? Yeah. Yeah.
And as you point out, this impacts our cognitive ability
Right.
because, as you point out, when you ask, and we have it on Google, we have it in all of these different things where there is the generative AI report that gives you all this information. You go, oh, this is a great summary. Except sometimes it is factually wrong, disastrously so.
We see it all
Uh,
the time. Look, I've read papers in Intro to Lit, for example. A student gives me an essay, and right from the first sentence, I can tell it's AI written. And in the course of the essay, it makes up characters who aren't even in the story that's been analyzed. It just complete nonsense. It's just laughably inaccurate. But in response to this, I want to mention another article that I actually sent you a couple days ago from Inside Higher Education that a lot of us are doing essentially unplugging. And this includes myself. In my face-to-face classes, now online classes is a different beast, but in my face-to-face classes, I've gone back to blue books, in-class writing with a pen or a pencil. And yes, there are some students with accommodations, and they go to the accessibility office, and if they have use of a computer, they can use it there. But they don't have access to the internet. But yeah, well, I essentially have gone back to the way things were 10, 20 years ago when students were doing a lot more in-class essays and so on. And guess what? So right now, this is anecdotal. That article, I would say, was largely anecdotal, but there probably will be studies.
Mhm.
But I have found myself that my students, in the beginning, there's some grumbling. What we have to write with a pen and in a blue in this paper. Haven't done that since second grade or whatever. So a little grumbling, but by the end of the semester, they're on board because they realize they're actually learning in this class. Whereas in some previous English classes, they might have been getting away with using AI to generate their essays for them. And that's not going to happen when you're in the room. You're having to respond to a prompt that you hadn't seen before, and you're handwriting your response. And I have found that just anecdotally, but I would say that on average, my students are learning a lot more since I've gone back to the in-class essay model. And I have them write every day. I have them write in response to the reading. First thing we do, reflection paragraph. I ask them open-ended questions about the reading, and they reflect for 15 minutes. Uh, Best use of my time I've ever had. And again, that gets them thinking about what they're reading, right? And of course, they're doing the same when they're evaluating, when they're using the skills we've talked about in order to, say, analyze a story or a poem or what have you. So I think that, I mean, some people are going to disagree with me and say, "Oh no, you're regressing. You're reactionary. You're going back to you have to integrate. It's a tool of the future." And we do get a lot of pressure, not everywhere, but a lot of administrators are like, "Oh no, this is the cool new toy, and we need to sex up the classroom here and use these cool new toys and integrate them into learning. So figure it out." Essentially that's the message a lot of us hear, right? So what would you say about that as a response to the let's say AI plague that we are currently in?
Um, yeah, I think more and more of it's going to have to be done with handwriting, which is frustrating
Mhm.
because it's a waste of class time. If we think about this, instead of the student having the time and the flexibility outside the classroom to when they are free, when they're in the environment that is conducive to their best work, to be able to do the work. We are now saying, no, basically, exam conditions, you're going to come into class, you're going to sit down in that seat with a pen and paper and do the work here because we can't trust the entire class not to cheat.
Right.
That is devastating
It's sad.
to creating a conducive educational environment where we want to be supportive and it's now becoming antagonistic, adversarial. But also people are saying, well, why are we practicing all of this when we should be using the new technology? And this is where I think people fundamentally don't realize what the big issue is. Because when we talk about composition classes or English classes, well, what's the point? I'm never going to have to write an essay. Why am I going to need to know about 19th century French poetry? And you're like, right. With every sort of class, you have sort of content stuff that you get, subject specific. But we also are developing skills. And with something like composition, a general ed course that the vast majority of students have to take,
Hmm.
the students seem to think it's about creating an essay. And you go, no, it's about the skills of analyzing a text, organizing that information, being able to then apply it to different sets of criteria
Critical
to
thinking. Yeah.
understand if we'll take a basic example at the end of this. but organize the material to construct an argument out of that material
Hmm.
and then communicate that argument with evidence in an effective way. And we use the 5 paragraph essay as a convenient way for them to do it. The point is not for us to go, oh, look, an essay that's going to teach me about something. The essay is the proof that the student knows and understands how to analyze a text, how to organize that information, how to then use that information and apply it to a specific problem, and then communicate that answer in a way that is logical, in a way that is detailed, and in a way that uses evidence to support the position.
Yeah.
And we just say, so create the essay. It's not about creating a brilliant essay. People think about it as the essay as a product. And the way I've tried to explain this in the past, if you're taking a course on baking, how to bake a cake, and so you sign up for a course, and it's all about these are the different ingredients. This is how you combine the ingredients. This is the technique you use to combine the ingredients. This is why you set the oven this way. This is how you do all of these things. Right. So for your final exam, I want you to bake me a cake using these techniques. So the student goes out, buys a cake from a bakery and submits it and goes, well, what's the problem? This is a really good cake. But you didn't make it. Well, no, but like the cake is really good. What's the issue? Like I did the course and I gave you the cake. No, but this cake does not prove that you know and understand all of those things.
Right.
And we can extend this further. If students are allowed to just plug in all of the information into an AI to generate the response, to create the work, well, why shouldn't lecturers then just take their work, plug it into an AI to grade? Because in fact, we could become really, really efficient here because the students on the first day of the course could generate all of the answers for all of the pieces of coursework all the way through the semester, submit them all at one time. And
And the
then,
instructor could feed them all into a grading AI and
yeah,
spit it
and on
out.
the second day, the instructor can have an AI grade it all and then put the grades in. And then that way, the students don't have to learn. The students don't have to attend anything. They can do whatever they want. The
Right.
instructor doesn't have to meet the students or teach them anything. And in fact, everyone gets the grades and they can go on and do other things with their time. That is so productive.
You know what's scary though, AP? There are some instructors who are using AI to grade essays. I'm sorry to say that we have colleagues out there who have succumbed or surrendered or whatever you want to call it, and they're using AI to grade AI derived essays, and it just seems like such an exercise in futility to me. But
What's even more frustrating is a lot of the students go, well, okay, but so then I do that. But the whole point of these courses is to teach the skills.
yes.
And the students go, well, what's the big deal? Like it's just a composition course. And
Hmm.
remember what I said that all of these companies have said you need to have a human in control of it. So forget about prompting for a minute. Just think about the thing that the AI has generated. Composition course, a general ed composition course, teaches you how to analyze a text, how to break that down into salient information, how to arrange it, and then to formulate it in such a way as you're communicating your points effectively. If you have not learned that basic skill set, how do you look at what the AI has produced and go, this is good? You can't evaluate it if you don't know what the source material was, if you don't know what goes into an essay. And let's move outside the realm of essays for a second. Oh, well, I get the AI to write my emails for me.
Hmm.
But if you don't know what goes into an email, if you don't understand how to email, and before people go, oh, well, everyone knows how to do that. No, no, they don't.
Hmm.
It's a learned skill, and not everyone knows, not everyone understands. And this is something that is taught in business communication. Simple formatting things like how to write an email, what it needs to contain, what you need to consider.
Right.
Um, but if you get an AI to generate an email, how do you know it's generated a good email? Oh, well, you read through it to make sure it's good. But if you don't know what goes into making a good email, how do you evaluate well, it looked good to me. But if
Right.
you don't know what the constituent elements are, So if we go back to our cake example, you go through the whole course or you skip the whole course, but the final thing is present a cake. So you tell the AI to make a cake and it makes this thing. You kind of look and go, yeah, it looks kind of good. So you submit it. The instructor cuts into it and the inside of it is uh, made of venomous, gooey, whatever. And
Or it
it's
used
toxic.
salt instead of sugar because it looks the same or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it looked right. It looked right. But its fundamentals were all wrong. And in fact, if anyone had eaten it, they would have been sick. But it looked okay.
Right.
And it's because the person didn't know what went into it. And this is the issue. I have seen students who English is not their first language, and they're trying desperately. They're working so hard in these courses,
Right.
and they are trying to submit their work in English, and it's difficult. I am not trying to take away from that. And some of them have even told me that they write their essay in their native language,
Right.
and then they use an AI to translate it,
Yep.
and they submit that, and they go, "But that's my writing," and I go,
No,
"But
it's not.
it's not."
No.
And this seems really, really unfair. And what I tend to point out is, okay, so you've written something in your native language. You've put it into an AI and hit translate. Now, if you put it into the AI again and hit translate again, just from the original, and then compare the two outputs, the two English outputs, the two English translations, are they identical? Well, no, they're not. There's going to be significant variation. If there's significant variation, which one is your writing?
Mm,
Because that's not your writing.
no, it's clearly not.
And this is it's an additional burden on people whose English is not their first language or English is not their strong suit.
It's not doing them a favor, though, if you allow that to happen because they're not improving their English by having an AI tool do the translating for them. They're
And
not learning the
that's
skill. That's the
yeah,
problem. Yeah.
and that's the point of the class. The point of the class is to improve our skills. And people say, oh yeah, but I can always use AI in the future. And you go, okay, so you're sitting in a meeting surrounded by your colleagues, and your boss says to you, okay, so in your report you said this. Can you explain this to everyone? Right. Let me
Hang
just
on.
ask my
Let Chat
AI.
GPT tell you. Yeah. So what do they need you for? Why don't they hire Chat GPT instead of you?
And this is the issue. People go, oh, but I can always use AI. You go, but when you're called on in real time to answer something, you need to know your material.
Right.
And this is ignoring the issue with bullshitting where things can be confidently wrong.
Right.
Like I have seen students submit essays and it's the famous line it's said by this character. You go, no, no, it's not.
Never
That
said
character does
that.
not say that. And the paragraph below is all about why, because this character says it, it's here's all of this analysis, but the analysis is all wrong because that character never said it. And so when I looked at this draft, I've highlighted and said, this character has not said this.
Right.
You need to fix this. And the same student submitted the essay and they had changed the name of the character for the quotation part,
Mm,
but hadn't changed any of the analysis because they didn't know what was in their essay.
right. Right. Yeah, I want to switch gears a little bit now, and this is very much related, but moving away from the inaccuracy to the sense of fulfillment, which I have observed in my classes that students who do their own work, who do their own writing, at the end of it all, have a much greater sense of fulfillment. I think it's obvious to say than those who choose to use AI. There's no investment. They don't care. They don't even care enough usually to check the essay over and see if there are inaccuracies. They don't even care that much.
Or they've left in what the AI has actually said.
Yeah, yeah. Because they're not invested. Whereas if the student is doing their own work, their own writing, they're invested. And I would say that they have a much greater sense of fulfillment having done that work, having made that effort. And I think this crosses over to the creative realm as well. Now, as I've said in the beginning, I'm a writer. I've published some books, and you are an editor. And I've had the privilege of working with you as an editor, which was a lot of fun, but also a great learning process. And I would submit that if I had instead chosen to consult ChatGPT, it wasn't around when we were working together, but
No, it was.
it had been it was already around then. Oh, okay. Well, if I had chosen to use that instead, I would not have learned anything. I wouldn't have learned nearly as much. The process of working with an editor versus asking an AI to fix your writing, okay? Again, it's not your writing once the AI gets its claws on it, in my opinion. You are having a tool without your understanding really what it's doing, improve your writing, then it's no longer your writing. And I would also say that you're not learning from that process. The interaction between a writer and an editor is an incredibly magical thing, in my opinion. That you have this process of this back and forth, considering the feedback and going back to how is it now? And there's a learning that takes place there. There's a magic there, I think, in that that back and forth that you are robbing yourself of if you are simply turning to an AI tool to do your editing for you. And furthermore, obviously somebody who just puts an input into ChatGPT says, write me a novel about, a young farm boy who is exiled from home and goes on an adventure involving a dragon and knights and blah blah blah. If you put that in there and it spits out your novel for you, and you put that up on Amazon for sale, you have zero fulfillment from that process. I'm sorry.
Well, you're
Maybe
also not an author.
you're not an author. You're not a writer. You're a joke. You are a hack. You are a fake. Sorry, but
Well, I know you feel I feel very strongly about this, but
yeah.
I wouldn't use that sort of language. And the reason being,
I'm saying
the
if you just tell it to write a novel for you and you put it out there as with your name on it as your novel.
well, let me explain this in a way because some people I have seen a YouTube channel where a guy who styles himself as an author, how
Hmm.
to write with AI, and I go, you are not writing. And I've created all of these prompts,
Right.
and they are in the back end, and it helps me do this, and then I go through and I fix things, and it sometimes comes up with ideas that I never would have thought of, and I go, oh, let's run with this, and I tell it to do these. I I would just say to that person, you are not an author.
Right.
And the reason I would justify this, because anytime I talk about AI or anytime I talk about it in this sort of sphere, and I say like the danger of it messing things up, creating these hallucinations, someone always comes back with write a better prompt. And you
Hmm.
go, first of all, in order to write a good prompt, you need to know what your output is. In order to write a good prompt, you need to know what you're actually doing. And these products are being marketed to people and sold to people as use this, and then you don't need to know the thing.
Hmm.
It'll just do it for you. So they don't know how, so they are relying on other people creating prompts that they will then copy, but they don't know why they're doing it. But let me posit a scenario to you. I have a classroom full of students, and I say, right, I want you to write a college level essay. It has to be 1,500 words. It must include uh, three academic sources. It must use two quotations from the source text that we are analyzing and two quotations from at least one of the academic sources we have used. It must be written in the full MLA style. It
Hmm.
must have a works cited section in MLA style with a proper works cited bibliography being created, all of those references. Any quotation must be properly. I can write an entire page of what we call prompts, and I give this to my students. So they go, they write an essay, they bring in their drafts, and I go through it and I'm going through and I'm making notes and I go, you need to fix this. So I give them further direction and further prompting.
Right.
So then they write a finished version and that's the thing that gets graded. Now, if I then said, well, I wrote that essay, everyone would look at me and go, no, you didn't. Your student wrote the essay.
Right.
And I go, well, no, I gave them a very detailed set of prompts.
That's
And
what you do
then
as an editor too. Yeah. Yeah.
when they generated it, I went through and I fixed it and told them to fix these things. So then they generated a new one.
Hmm.
So I basically wrote the essay, didn't I? And no, I didn't. My student did.
Right.
And yet somehow, when some idiot online says, right, I told this computer program to generate this thing, and I gave it very detailed prompts, which means that I wrote it. No, you didn't. It wrote it.
Right.
At the very best, and at the most generous, you could call yourself an editor,
Hmm.
but you are not a writer, you are not an author.
I think you could call yourself a prompt inputter. That's about it.
Prompt it, but if they then take what it has generated and they go through and they say, oh, well, this needs fixed, this needs fixed.
Oh,
So they
then
put it,
maybe, okay, editor. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
go, at very best, you could call yourself an editor,
Yeah.
but you're not an author. You didn't write that. And when you, and they go, oh, but using a program, it's like, and you go, no, it is not like using a calculator. Oh, well, you would object to spell check on a computer. No, no, I don't. Although all of the long-term studies have shown that our ability to spell
Yeah.
has gotten worse because of spell check.
Yep.
So your ability to write will get worse if you use this to generate your writing. Oh, but it saves so much time. Yeah, but then would it save time doing what? Instead of writing it, you got a program to do it. There are entire YouTube channels where they have AI generated science fiction stories with AI generated narrators reading the science fiction stories and AI generated art for these things. I have listened to a whole bunch of them. And the very first time you hear one of them, you go, actually, that's not bad. Yeah, there were some plot holes. Yeah, there was some really bad writing in it. Yeah, there were some mistakes. Yeah, but a lot of debut authors and self-taught authors, the first time they're doing these sorts of things, they make these kinds of mistakes. Yeah, fine. The problem is they have about 9 different stories and they're all variations on those 9 stories.
Right.
And they're all bad. They all contain the same types of errors because the person generating them can generate that story and then go rewrite this story with a slightly different, and change the prompt. They can generate millions of them. And then they can get an AI narrator to read it out, and the AI narrator's an idiot. And generate an AI video to go with this. And they do that and they put that up. And they might get, let's say they get a couple of thousand views on each one, but they can run 50 YouTube channels all pushing out this slop. And it is slop. It is bad writing. And the first time you come across it, you might go, oh, well, that's quite impressive. Until you go through 20 of them and you realize, actually, these are A, all variations on the same 7 basic premises. B, they all contain the same types of errors. There is no improvement.
Mm.
And they are not even like good entertainment because essentially they are bad. And the more that they produce, and this is a major issue for all of the LLMs, the more that is produced like this, these large language models are scraping that information and it is now further polluting.
So it's getting worse instead of better.
It's getting worse to the point that it can cause a cascade error in the LLM. It'll stop functioning at some point
Well, I
because,
won't be mourning if that happens, I can tell you that.
well, and a lot of people who have the skills, you go, okay, so it died a death, right? But we can still carry on, we can still function. And suddenly all these other people are going, but I but
Yeah.
how do I do it if I can't get the thing to do the thing for me?
Right.
And this is why people calling themselves authors or artists because of this. You
Right.
go, at best, you are an editor. And the whole idea, oh, well, just write a better prompt. You can writing good prompts. Yeah, there's a skill to it. But as each of these programs iterates, as more programs come up, that there's going to be ways of automating the prompting process. You
Yeah.
fill in the sort of the keywords that you want. But even then, unless you know how to analyze and pick apart the product, you don't know whether it has done the thing that you wanted it to do.
Right. Because ultimately, I think we engage in creative processes, not just for the product, but for the transformation that occurs within us. Like doing something creative is just important for your sense of fulfillment. We're in an era with unprecedented amounts of depression and anxiety. And I think a lot of it is our reliance on these tools to just entertain us, mindless, dopamine producing, but ultimately empty forms of entertainment, or even now doing our jobs for us. there's no sense of fulfillment in that, right? I think that you need to do something. I mean, work may feel like a pain in the moment, but at the end of it, you do feel a sense of fulfillment having accomplished something. And if you're basically letting the AI do it all for you, you're robbing yourself of that. You're going to be an empty husk. So I think that that's as serious an issue as anything else for me is what are we doing to ourselves as human beings by relying on these things and allowing them to replace our creativity is, I think, the worst of it.
And again, I see it as we began by talking about this cognitive offloading and how it's damaging to critical thinking.
Right.
And people, well, what's the big deal? So, okay, the whole point is you invest time at college to develop these skills, these foundational skills. But okay, you're never going to have to write an essay. But then you're sitting down that night and you're watching the news and you hear a news story. Are you aware of how language is being used potentially to narrativize events or to put a particular spin on it and what that spin is and why it's in place? Are you aware of logical fallacies that have been created in a speech that someone is given? Are you aware of when they say one thing, what the ramifications of that thing are? Or, as these people would say, oh, well, I could just put it into the AI if I want to know. And you go, okay, so what time saving do you have of, right, here's a news story. Let me put it into the AI and have the AI tell me what the news story means. Oh, here's a speech that I'm listening to. I'll just put it into the AI and it can. You're now spending double the amount of time.
Right.
That's not a time saving. Investing the time at college, at university, at night classes, or your own study time. You don't have to go to a formal institution. You can practice and develop this. Lots of people have. Colleges and universities are basically shortcuts so that you can circumvent these things.
Mhm.
But you develop the skills so that when you're listening to the news, when you're reading a book, when you're reading a newspaper, when you're looking at a magazine article, when you're looking at an advertisement, you start to break down how and why these things are impacting us, how and why they do it, what effects they're creating. It helps us be sharper in interpreting information. And when suddenly something comes up on a social media feed going, oh, blah, 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 this person has done this thing and they're terrible, we can look at it and go, hang on a second. That
Right.
seems slightly outlandish. And we can delve into it deeper.
To put it another way, and to completely agree with you, what's the number one skill that employers want, employers in the business world? They want employees who can think critically. That's it. That is the number one skill they want. And if all you're doing during your education is relying on AI to do your thinking for you, and the parts of your brain that do the critical thinking are actually atrophying through that whole process, you're not going to be valuable to your future employer. They're not going to need you. They can just use the AI tool themselves, and they would be too smart to do that because the AI is going to be full of errors and such. So you're robbing yourself if you're leaning on these tools to do your thinking for you. You're robbing yourself.
And a frightening thing about this, because obviously I've had to speak to a number of students about using AI inappropriately. Not that in the courses I was teaching there was an appropriate way to use it, because we can deal with that point in a second if you want. But
Sure.
in speaking to them, and they're going, yeah, but what's the big deal? And I went, okay, you have a broken leg and you've been in a serious car accident, and you go to a hospital and you recognize the doctors who are there because they were all at college with you, and you know that they got through a lot of their college exams and courseworks using AI. Do you trust them to treat you? Do you trust them to treat you?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, no, but obviously they would focus on the important things. And they go, right. So when you're 18 and 19, you fully understand all of the important things and the foundational things that you need to know. You can predict the future that accurately that you need to know what these skills are. And instead of trusting these skills that humankind has pointed out for the last several thousand years, saying this is actually really important. Here's a really efficient, quick way to learn this skill to help you practice it that you can apply it in all these other aspects of your life. You've decided at 18 or 19, those thousands of years of human evolution and education and civilization, you're all wrong. I don't actually need to know that or develop that skill. Because at 18 or 19, you're that certain. But okay, let's say it's not a doctor. Let's say you're getting on a plane and you go, oh, look, there's those pilots. I remember them from college. They got through all of their stuff by using AI. Do you trust them to fly the plane? Oh, well,
Hmm.
I'm sure they had to do practical exams. Yeah, but a storm comes out of nowhere. And what are they going to ask the AI how to navigate it?
Hmm.
Oh, the chef at the local restaurant you're taking your family to celebrate. Well, they got through culinary school by doing AI. How confident are you that they actually understand how to store things properly? How to make sure that you don't get food poisoning? Oh, well, those are important things.
Hmm.
When people complain about election results and all that, oh, well, people just don't know what they're voting. You go, right. How do we make sure that people, even if I disagree with who they have voted for, they disagree with who I voted for, but if people fundamentally understand the issues and they can communicate that effectively to other people to explain their position, we
Right.
can move away from partisan screaming at each other to actual communication and understanding of different positions and value sets and systems. And we do that by understanding a lot of this argumentation, understanding these things, instead of simply, oh, they're just stupid.
Yep.
Because we live in an age of information, misinformation, and disinformation,
Right.
right? Social media, the internet is awash with this.
Right.
How are we meant to know what to trust and what not to trust? Well, look, critical thinking skills. We look at the rhetorical devices being used to manipulate us. We look at evaluating a source and whether that source is credible. We can go through all of these things instead of, oh, well, I like that guy. He said that thing, therefore that must be true. No, oh, well, I could just ask the AI. And you go, but then if the AI gives you an answer you don't like, oh, well, that AI is biased.
Right.
And we've seen that recently when, was it Grok, the uh, Twitter AI, said things about one of the representatives in Congress, and she got very, very annoyed and accused this AI of having a liberal bias.
Interesting. Especially
And
given that it's Twitter, but yeah.
because we fall back on that same argumentation. And
Yeah.
so this is why I keep saying a lot of these things, a lot of what you learn at university, yes, there's an information sort of data set or subject specific knowledge that you get, but
Right.
there is a skill set that you develop. And in order to use AI effectively in the future, you actually still need a lot of those skills. The most sophisticated uses of AI for generative purposes, the thing that I've been arguing against. But the best use of that is from someone who understands what an audience needs, what the tone, style, level of diction, that they understand the purpose and intent of the writing, that they understand the rhetorical devices that they should be using, that they understand all of those fundamental principles. They can tell the AI to generate it, and then they can take that thing and they can go through it line by line to
Mm.
see if it's actually inputted properly.
Right.
And that, if you understand the key fundamentals, if you're practiced at them, then we can see that later on, using generative AI might be useful. But it can't be useful to practice those things because if it's producing an output, you can't tell whether the output is good. And I've had people argue with me and say, oh, well, what if I write my draft and then I just get the AI to correct it? You go, right. But if you write your draft and I grade it and you get a mark that shows how well you did
Right.
and highlights the things that you need to improve, then you put it through an AI to make it better. Why should that get a better mark? It's not about creating the better essay. It's about being able to learn the skills. And you just got an AI to do it. So what? I'm going to improve your grade because an AI made your writing better.
Right.
What sort of topsy-turvy world are we living in where that's deemed, oh, well, that's useful because now the student gets a good mark, but I got to see their original work. And you go, well, what purpose does the AI serve in helping the student learn? It's not. It's just getting them a better mark, but they
Right.
didn't write it.
It's producing a product that is not really the students. And I think it's also telling, this is a bit of I guess, a moral dimension to all this. It also still bothers me very much that the people who created, most of the people who created these AI tools in the first place did so by stealing. They did so dishonestly. And
Philip, let
there may be
me jump in here.
exceptions to that, but
No,
a
but
lot
let
of,
me jump in here just for a second.
sure.
The companies that you created training data allegedly stole that training data. Use the word allegedly until it's been proven in a court of law.
Yeah, well, okay, allegedly.
And they have allegedly violated copyright
Right.
in order to train their
This is my
AIs.
friend, the lawyer, who's talking here. Yes, I know, I know. Okay. But
Um,
okay, but we all, I think, allegedly believe that essentially it's stolen. But okay, fine. Allegedly, they stole copyrighted material and used it to train their AI, and that bothers me that they did that. And it just seems to me that a tool created that way, uh, and the uses that unfortunately people are making of it, even though the sales sign says, oh, it will enhance this and that, the real actual uses of it are more often than not more like abuses rather than uses. So,
and it's a very significant, like that's one of the major ethical issues with it. The fruit of the poisonous tree. If
right.
something has been created unethically,
Allegedly.
then no, but I'm posing a hypothetical. I said if something has been created unethically
Right.
and is morally bankrupt, then how can its products be ethical? That there's a big conversation to be had about that.
Yeah.
And even when I believe one of the senior, like it was like the CEO or something of one of these companies was giving evidence in the UK to a select committee about this,
Hmm.
said, well, copyright free material, so things that their copyright had expired, that's not useful for training the AI because that would then, that's stuff that's 100 years old. How is that relevant to today? In order to make our product relevant to today, we needed stuff from today. You go, okay. So in that case, think of any business. If I'm opening up a restaurant and I go, right, I'm going to need meat, source of meat. So I go around to the local butcher shop. I go in through the back door when they're not looking and I steal all of the meat and I go to my restaurant and I cook it up and I serve it. And I'm able to do this. And people are, oh, this is amazing. And the butcher go, hang on, you just stole my product.
Right.
Oh, yeah, but I can't make my business profitable unless I just take your stuff for free. If I had to pay for it, then I wouldn't make as much money. And that's essentially what
Yeah.
I think a lot of these companies have done. They went, it's too expensive to pay authors a license fee for using their work. Libraries pay a license fee for the books,
And they're underfunded. Yeah.
and they're underfunded. But these companies that have raised billions of dollars and whose CEOs and senior officers are paid millions of dollars, they can't afford to pay the people whose work they are using.
Yeah. Well, it tells you about their motives, and I think that that is not unrelated to the uses that their product has been linked
And
with.
this is what frustrates me about the entire thing, that people are no longer developing the skills. They are blindly trusting a product.
Hmm.
And they're blindly trusting a product that we know regularly and routinely gets things factually wrong, can change the meaning of things. Like even when I gave it a very simple prompt with a piece of Lovecraft, and I have a video on this,
Hmm.
and it was a piece of Lovecraft writing, and I just said edit for clarity, like a very straightforward thing, and it absolutely changed the meaning of a sentence. It changed the meaning of a paragraph, like radically changed it. And in the console, you just need to use better prompts. And you go, right, if I had said, edit this for clarity for a 15-year-old to read without changing the major meaning of, like, I'd gone through and done all of that, it still does that
Hmm.
because it doesn't matter how sophisticated the prompt is, it doesn't know what things mean.
Right.
It's a very sophisticated word prediction program.
Hmm.
Very sophisticated, very interesting. So you can't reliably trust it. You know it's going to do that thing. So, okay, get it to edit everything for clarity, then go through it. And like, has it edited for clarity? You need to check. And if you don't know what that is, are you going to ask a different AI to check if that has been edited for clarity? You get an AI to check the other AI? And this is frustrating because the skills that we actually need to evaluate the products are the very things that are being atrophied and destroyed by these products.
Exactly. Yeah.
When students, and it really frustrated me, I was trying to teach, it was in communications, and was saying, right, when you're writing an email, always like audience, who is your audience? When we are communicating, we have to think of audience, which is why if you or I are trying to explain an analysis in class, we don't shift into postgraduate language to explain something. We look at our class, we understand the purpose of what we are doing, the desire that we have for what they are going to learn, the purpose and intent of this, and the level that they are currently at. And we find the language to express that to them so that they understand the concepts. Because then we can build up, once they understand the fundamental concepts, we build up with, okay, let's introduce this term, we'll explain this term, and we'll put it into practice. But we are aware of our audience. But a lot of people go, well, it's just an email. And you go, right. So is there a difference between, say, if I was emailing you
Hmm.
and you received an email from me and it was, Dear Professor Chase,
Hmm.
you'd look at that as an email from me and go, what's
Is he
AP
being
doing?
snarky again? That's what I would think.
Because I know, oh, but it's a formal email. But if I said, Dear Philip, you'd
Right.
go, oh, yeah, fair enough. Like AP's slightly more formal than me. If I just said
Dear,
Philip,
dear idiot. Oh yeah, that's AP. Yeah.
um, but if I said Dear Phil, you'd go,
I would get mad. Yeah.
right? Because we know and we understand our audience and what those things sort of do. And I
Right.
say, oh, you know that about that video that we were going to do, I need to change the time of that. Is that going to be okay? You go, what video? When were we going to do it?
Uh-huh.
It's too vague. Now, the thing is, when I'm writing it, I know exactly which video I'm thinking about.
Right.
But part of the whole thing about communication is you have to think of what your audience knows. I go, okay, if I'm explaining something to Philip, I need to let him know, you know, the video that we were planning to do in 2 weeks' time on the, I'd give the date. It was about this thing. Could we possibly postpone it until X date? That it's very, very clear and it's laid out in a logical fashion. That's the thing that a lot of students don't understand because they send you an email, sorry, I wasn't in class. So no greeting.
Wait, no. Did I miss anything important?
Sorry, I wasn't in class. Did I miss anything important? Can you just tell me what I need to know?
Right.
And then they don't sign it. So
Right.
you have this email that has arrived in your email inbox. And the thing is, it is someone's surname, usually, but there might be a couple of letters or numbers in it because, there are a lot of repeat surnames at these institutions over
Sure.
the years, and they tend to, they accumulate these email addresses.
You have 120 students in a given semester.
And
Yeah.
you have 120 students, and you go, right, which one is this? Hang on.
That's where I get out my note, my grade book, and I'm like, all right, which class are you in? Oh goodness.
And
Okay.
that you literally have to go through
Yeah.
each of the classes to try and find that surname. And the thing is, if it's a relatively common surname, you're
Yeah.
like, okay, is it that one or that? Right. So then you go and look at your attendance record to see, well, no, they were in class that day.
Yeah.
Oh, they missed class at the start of the week. And you've just spent 30 minutes of time trying to track this down for a really insulting email when you go, yes, you missed class. We covered material. It's look at the online shell that has all of this information. That's what we discussed. You missed it. I can't tell you what you need to know. That's what class is.
Right. Oh
But,
dear.
but people don't realize that. And even some very intelligent professional people who I was teaching in a business course, they fundamentally didn't understand where their emails were falling short. And so I was, it was a class assignment, so I was putting up examples and I was walking through it, explaining all this. And people were, oh, right, yeah. but the AI said that was fine.
Right.
And I said, by the way, here's a whole bunch of them. And I pointed out, these are all written by AI. How do you know that? I mean, look at them. Same patterning, same phrasing, same structure of things, same information missing. And I went through it all. And then, but studies have shown that personal correspondence is highly effective in building and networking, building relationships and networking and all this sort of thing. Yeah, but using an AI isn't personal correspondence.
Right. And the AI has learned how to write by essentially scooping up all the sludge from the internet, right?
But they said, but how do you know it was AI? And I went, okay, you send how many emails a day? And they're like, well, maybe like five or six. I went, okay, but you don't send five or six to the same person. You send it to a bunch of people. Yeah. I have 120 students. If half of them on day one send me an email, that's 60 emails I get. Now, if they're all written by AI, how quickly do you think I pick up on the pattern?
Hmm.
And oh, I never thought of that. Because again, we're not thinking about
Right.
the audience. We're not thinking outside of ourselves. And AI is basically doubling down on the egocentrism and
Hmm.
echo chambers that we have created through social media curation, through the algorithms that are monitoring our news feeds and generating our news feeds
Right.
and our social media. That using AIs is only going to exacerbate that problem
Yep.
and make it more and more and more difficult to effectively communicate.
Gonna propel us deeper down those dark holes. Yeah.
Um, so this is why I fundamentally object to it. And I again, for a system that was created through potentially or allegedly having stolen work from authors, to have someone else call themselves an author by using this stuff
Hmm.
to generate slop, to self-publish, usually because, and the reason they're self-publishing it is they're generating a lot of this
Right.
and they're putting it up on Amazon because if they can sell a few of that one and sell a few of that one and sell a few of that one, then they start making money.
Right.
And they're not thinking about the quality of what they're doing or how other authors have been harmed or how they're even harming their own marketplace.
Right.
Um, and
Very short-sighted. Yeah.
yeah, and it's making everything worse.
Yep. Well, I think that covers it pretty well. We don't have a rosy outlook on AI, certainly as it's been used. Now, again, as we said in the beginning, we recognize that there are other kinds of AI than the type that we're talking about, and that these types have led to some important breakthroughs and have helped humanity in some important ways. So we're not outright saying AI equals evil, but I think what we're objecting to is how AI, in some sense, was actually the generative AI we're talking about, how it was produced in the first place, but mostly how we're using it or abusing it, frankly, and what's the cost? What's the price we're paying for the abuse of this tool? Which every tool can be used well, and it can be used in ways that are harmful. And I think our perception as academics, as creatives, is that at the moment, it's doing more harm than good in our realms, at least. So that's where I stand, at least. I don't, have I misrepresented you in any way, AP?
No. And in fact, like those moments when, you're talking to a student about their essay and you go, "Can you explain this to me?" And they look at it and you realize it's the first time they've ever read the paragraph in the essay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and then they get really upset when you give them a zero. Like, but I worked really hard on this. No, you didn't.
No. Yeah.
Um, and students get really upset. And I've had students
You
go,
just
"But this is
asked
going."
what, okay, what, some random word here. What does systemic mean? Right? You use this word three times in the essay. What does systemic mean? I don't have to tell you that.
But part of the issue, one of the reasons why I am so worried about this is students are using it because they think it's fine, and their videos saying this is how you get around AI detection,
Right.
and you go, right, okay, that's how you get around, but things change. But also remember, we're dealing with a huge volume of this. We start picking things up very quickly, and if you've included quotations that are not actual quotations, that's academic dishonesty. Has nothing to do with me accusing you of using AI. I just go, that's academic dishonesty because you fabricated data. You then have analysis of that fabricated data, which means that this is, again, an academic dishonesty offense
Right.
because this analysis is not predicated on actual data. So you are publishing false or you're producing false work. So there's two academic dishonesty offenses that caused by an AI, but your name's on it. You said that you did it.
Right. But then the
Look,
student says, "Oh, but I asked my girlfriend to write the paper for me, and she must have used AI."
and you go, well, that's another academic dishonesty offense. So, but this can absolutely derail a student's academic career. And
Sure.
when I have pointed out now the issue with it, you might as a student think, well, I don't think this is important. This has nothing to do with my career, blah, 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 blah. You go, okay. But you've been asked to do something and you've decided to break the rules. You've decided to cheat,
Right.
which unfortunately you have consciously and actively decided to cheat, which makes you a cheater. When your instructor then says, did you do this? And you've denied it, you have now become a liar and
Right.
you've committed academic dishonesty offenses, which means that you're fundamentally dishonest. So, unfortunately, you've become a liar, a cheat, and you're a dishonest person.
Right.
And that's not, well, he's calling me that. You go, no, your actions
It's
are
factual.
labeled
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And they then get really upset. How dare you call me a cheat? Did you do this? No, no, I didn't. Well, what about? Okay, so I did. Right. So you did cheat. You're a cheater. You then lied about it. So you're a liar. And both of those things are dishonest. Therefore, you are a dishonest person.
Yeah.
No, but that's really mean to call me those things. But that's what you did.
Yeah.
Well, the subject's stupid. Yeah, but you have just proven that you are an untrustworthy, lying, dishonest person. So when you ask someone for a reference,
Why
what's the
don't they
reference going to say?
they're gonna have to make Chat GPT one of their references.
But not only that, this person did, and they go, oh, because the subject isn't important. Right. But what would your boss say if they found out that if you didn't think something was important,
Right.
regardless of whether or not you understood the full ramifications of it, but if you didn't think it was important, you would lie and you would cheat. What does that say about you as a person?
Right.
Those are not good qualities to be doubling down on.
Right.
Because even if you dislike the work, even if you think the work it's not worth your time and it's boring and it's silly and it's dumb, fine. But it's for one semester, for one class that you're taking, you signed up to take for whatever reason. It might
Mm.
be a core class, or it might be something you had to do to fill in a gap in your degree. But you signed up to do it, and it might be dumb, it might be silly, it might be something you think is absolutely useless. But if you have integrity, you will do the work.
Yeah. I
If
do
you have
feel
integrity, you will not lie and cheat.
right, of course. Yes, I agree with everything you said. I do feel a little bad in the sense that our students today live in an era when it's easier than ever to cheat. The
Yeah.
temptation is out is everywhere. It's just pervasive. And it does take a certain amount of integrity to say no. Or a professor who says, "Guess what? We're doing all our essays in class." And then you take that temptation away, right? So I do feel bad. I just want to say that for the
Oh,
students.
no.
I
And
didn't. I went to college. I had to write everything by hand in class. I had a typewriter that I could use from home. There was no internet. The opportunities to cheat were few and far between. And today it's just so easy. These tools have made it so easy.
didn't you have to use a quill, pen, and vellum? Wasn't that what was common when you were young?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
But
So
throughout that, like we've had what Cole's notes or York notes, like all of those. You remember the old study guides?
yeah, 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 yeah.
But if you look back in time, when they first came out, the author of them was on the cover. So it was
Uh-huh.
like Dr. Philip Chase, and it was a whole study guide on Beowulf.
Cliff notes here, but yeah,
Oh, Cliff Notes. But like there are whole sort of
yeah.
there were a number of different publications, but they all did the same thing. But
Right.
they had the qualifications and the person who authored it on the front cover. And you could look up their bio. And they were intended as study guides. Read this. And you're having a class on it. But here's additional supplemental material. But of course, when that happened, like some students went, well, I don't need to read the thing, I'll just use this. And but they forgot that their teachers, their lecturers, like we'd have looked at it. Like A, not only did we know the original source material, but B, do you not think we didn't look
Yeah.
at the study guide to see what it said?
Yeah.
But at least, at the very least, the person producing it could be traced, and they were almost always a subject expert. And
Right.
so there was a level of credibility to the analysis that was produced.
And then it evolved into an online thing with like Spark Notes where the credibility went downhill, but it was a similar kind of thing. But now we're in this AI era where I doubt that anyone even uses Spark Notes anymore because it's
But
because of
here's,
ChatGPT.
here's a really frightening thing.
Yeah.
So even if you've double checked your quotations and even if you've double checked the analysis and all of this sort of stuff, because these LLMs have scraped this data from the internet, they have used all of these sources to go into its training. They may have used the exact point and the exact phrasing from a published work
Mm,
without crediting it. And if you don't know that and you put your name on it, you're not guilty of plagiarism
right.
because generative AI has a huge plagiarism issue.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's fundamental to it. It's a tool created from plagiarism, essentially. Yeah.
Allegedly. Um,
Allegedly.
but the issue for shit, because it's not just the bits and quotations.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are entire paragraphs. And I have seen this in courses where multiple students have handed in essays on the same topic. And you go, that paragraph here, and in this essay, and in this, you
Yeah.
look across all these essays, you go, those are very similar paragraphs. Are you all stupid? You're all using the same program, using the
Mm,
same prompt to answer the same essay, and you don't think it's going to kick these things up?
yeah.
And so suddenly, in addition to all of the other, even without accusing anyone of using AI, you have a plagiarism issue. And again, an academic dishonesty offense. There's one last point about these AIs that I
All right.
want to talk.
One last point.
One last point. So these AIs, you don't own them. They're not on your computer. Like you can access them through your computer, but they are not located on your computer. You don't own them. You don't control them. So any information you put into it, you're putting into a third
Mm,
party software platform. And we know that it is learning, very loose term, but it is using data inputs to create things and improve its own algorithm. So it's storing the information. So if you are a company and you have private confidential data and there's an internal report about your company's profitability and your plans, and you feed that into a third party piece of software,
mm-mm.
do you have permission to do that? Have you checked, have you checked the governance about communications and the use of the data? Now, it's very, very difficult for someone to go into that AI and kick that information out because again, it's a lot of it's a black box. But suddenly we have seen this that depending on how it's been set up, this happened with Meta's AI, that people were using conversations with Meta's AI and they were asking it medical questions, but they hadn't clicked on the thing to say keep private. And with a simple prompt, these AI engineers and people who were interested kicked up entire conversations that had the username, what they asked the AI, and what the AI response was. And this was private psychological information, private
Oh,
medical information.
whoa.
This had issues to do with relationships. Um, and then you look at sort of the information that's being given out, recommendations, like asking it for advice, because they are formulated in a way, they are chatbots. They're meant to
Mm,
be convincing and sympathetic. They're going to say things to fulfill that function.
yeah.
And the advice given out, some of the advice was to tell people who were on medication for various psychiatric conditions to
Mm.
stop taking their medication.
Yeah, actually there are. I read about a few people who even gone so far as to become delusional because of they're in a relationship with ChatGPT, and essentially it seems that these AI have go to a place where they understand they want to stroke the ego of the person, and they make them feel like they're something special. And the next thing you know, it goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and the person ends up believing they're the next messiah or something. And this is something we're seeing, and they're actually cutting themselves off from their actual relationships with their loved ones, with their family and friends, because they've gone down this crazy rabbit hole with their relationship with their AI. It's a thing, apparently.
Yep.
Yeah.
So just to sum up, it has a negative impact on cognitive development and the skill training that we need for critical thinking.
Yeah.
It makes it easy to cheat, and in doing so, we end up cheating ourselves. We aren't learning the skills that we are paying to learn, but also we aren't gaining the skills necessary to check whether the output is any good, which is the skill we want to market later on in life. When we're working in a company, they say use AI. Now you know how to judge the output, but you need to learn that first.
Right.
It's not the same as a calculator. And that argument is facetious and reductive and dumb. It's not the same as a spell check. That argument is also dumb and inaccurate. It has major issues with it creating flawed, imperfect, wrong, factually inaccurate material that it is very confident about and sounds very confident about that it's right. So it can misinform you. There is no way to easily tell what information it has generated that is false. You have to check every single piece of it. So it's not saving you as much time as you think. It also makes up quotations, it makes up references, it makes up sources, and you will have to track them all down. It also has a major issue with plagiarism, which, because you stick your name on something, you stick on the product, it looks like you plagiarized, not that you used a machine to do it. And in all of these things, it fools you into thinking that you're the person who created it when clearly you're not. So you don't have those skills, you don't have that ability.
Right.
It has done those things. And
Right.
it doesn't matter how fancy your prompting is,
And it's
you still aren't
soulless.
the right.
It's soulless, and if you abuse it, it'll make you dumber and sadder.
And it has dangerous repercussions for echo chambers. It can
Yeah.
be manipulated to provide false data. Like there are whole sort of dangers with it when we start trusting it blindly. So you can't trust it blindly. In which case, what use is it? I can trust my calculator if I put in the thing and it gives me that. I go, there's that. And I go, oh, but hang on. My teacher said that was wrong. And I look at what I typed in and go, oh, I typed it in wrong.
Mm.
But I can trust that the calculator will do the right thing.
Right. Plus, the calculator is not going to convince you that you're the next Messiah.
And well, and the last thing is it is unwittingly causing students to create severe damage to their personal reputations and their professional reputations.
Right. Right.
Because if you're willing to cheat on a course, who's to say that you aren't willing to cheat the company? If
Hmm.
you're willing to lie about cheating, who say that you aren't going to lie to your company?
Right.
And again, like my students say, oh, but I would never do that. But you just did
Mm.
in a lower stakes environment.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've confronted students with this, and the response often is, "Oh, that's not me. I don't do things like that." But you just did, right? It's right here, you know. So
And again, people do not realize the damage this can do, not only to their academic career,
hmm
but their professional career. What happens when you get known as being a cheat, as a liar, as a fraud, as being dishonest?
yeah. Yeah, well, like I said, I feel
It's
bad that they're in this environment where it's so much easier to fall into that, and when it's so pervasive as well, you feel like, well, everyone else is doing it. I'm going to fall behind if I don't, that kind of thing. So it's just, I am very concerned about where we are now, but I do see signs that people are actually starting to figure this out. And I mentioned the article that talked about educators who are finally saying, no, we don't think this is the great new toy that is being sold to us. And in fact, we're going to go back to a system where we don't have to use this stuff and where it's actually taking that temptation out of the way of our students because we know that our students are learning when they're doing it the old way, and we know that they're not learning when they're using these tools or abusing these tools. So,
And do you know the expression, this is why we can't have nice things?
hmm
Because there are so many people out there who try to use it responsibly, who are trying to find interesting and useful uses to it, who are maintaining their integrity in what they are doing, that they are reading through source material, they are building all of these things, and they're using it to help them. That there are these things that can be done with it. If we, we're ignoring potential ethical issues and the environmental issues about its energy usage. But ignoring those for a second, there are people out there who are trying to do this to find good ways to be using AI.
hmm
And they are now at a disadvantage because of all of these other people who are abusing it and causing these issues. And this is why we can't have nice things. This is why we can't have things that could make life a lot easier for certain individuals because other people will abuse it. And the damage caused by that can far outweigh the benefits to that individual. And, you know, Silicon Valley used to have this whole expression, move fast and break things. And quite a lot of the time, I think it's because they didn't spend enough time studying the humanities. Because sometimes when you break stuff, you cannot put it back together.
Right. They're not
And,
concerned about the effects on our students. They're concerned about how much money they're making, and that's why they don't care. Yeah.
but thank you very much for this chat, Philip. I'm
Yeah,
now
no,
going to
this
go
was.
and sit in the corner and cry.
Well, I see some signs of hope. I don't want to end on a dour note because I do see some signs of hope that people are waking up and beginning to see that this is and the way we're using it or abusing it now is more detrimental than helpful. And I think that there are plenty of people out there who don't want to live in that world. And so I think we're going to see more and more people beginning to push back, against this image of AI being just pure positive. Only the more you use it, the better, et cetera, et cetera. And that it's going to make our lives better and easier and do everything for us, and it's going to be just hunky dory. I think we're seeing more people realizing that's not a future that we would want to have. That we would lose something fundamental to our humanity in that future. So yeah.
There's a film called Idiocracy.
hmm
It
Yeah.
wasn't meant to be a blueprint for the future.
Yeah.
It was meant to be a warning.
Yeah. There's another film called Wall-E.
Mm.
There's a few films where we could see where we're heading. Hopefully we can avoid that though. So, but anyway, thank you so much, AP. It's always a delight to talk with you. I'm so glad that we had this opportunity, and hopefully people will leave us some comments, their thoughts on AI and its uses and abuses, and if you, yeah, just feel free to leave your thoughts. But thank you so much for watching, and until next time.